It's finally time. The day we've been waiting for since 2016. Welcome, my faithful friends, to Weapons Month 5. This series has a lot of sentimental value to me. Weapons Month 1 was one of my first major undertakings on this channel. It's where I started developing my style of odd-topic, detail-oriented countdowns, and where I got my reputation for being a giant chatterbox. I did it 3 times, the lists getting more and more elaborate each time, and then I mixed it up with an Elements-themed 4th installment. But for fear of it getting stale, I put the series to bed until the day might come that I reach my fabled Patreon goal. And that day is today. The time is now, and that month is Weapons Month 5. Though, let's be honest, I'm never going to get all 5 videos out in 1 month. That's more of an honorary title. What I can promise is that the next 5 lists will feature new tools of destruction, some being highly requested by viewers like you, others hopefully a bit more surprising. I like to think my videos have improved in quality and focus since the last decade, but we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, I'm not the psychic one here. While the rest of the topics this month will be physical weapons, sometimes the only weapon you need is the old noggin. Especially if your noggin can remotely detonate a man's head. Psychics are a broad category in video games and fiction as a whole, and since its definition fluctuates depending on a game's universe, I'll need a moment to set the parameters. First of all, how do we distinguish psychic powers from magic? Oftentimes, psychic powers are just a writer's way of injecting a faux magic system into science fiction, giving a character mysterious powers without making it sound too whimsical. There are numerous abilities typically associated with psychics, but I managed to divide these supernatural stunts into 3 major categories. First, you have kinesis, where a practitioner can manipulate the physical world around them just by thinking. The most common type here is telekinesis, moving things with your mind, but this can also include energy projection or elemental powers like pyrokinesis or cryokinesis. It can be tough to identify whether some examples count, like Endeavor from My Hero Academia. He controls fire, but I wouldn't say it's a psychic power, as it's not really brain-related. However, Jean Grey from the X-Men creates fire with her mind in addition to levitation, so that totally counts. The second category is telepathy, when an adept's mind interacts with the minds of others. This can be as simple as speaking without words, or it can be much more invasive, reading people's thoughts, tricking them with illusions, controlling them, or just shutting their brain off. And this is not to be confused with our third category, clairvoyance, which is the ability to know the unknowable. These are your oracles and psychic detectives, seeing the future, gazing into the past, or scrying through the present. This is the hardest category to use offensively, but it can be done, such as Shulk, who gets glimpses of incoming attacks and reacts accordingly. So with that established, let me get a few more general Weapons Month rules out of the way since it's been a while. These lists are about fighters who use their weapon, or in this case their power, to come out on top in a fight. So as much as I love Maya Fey, her powers aren't a weapon, even if she is accused of killing people once a week. We tend to favor characters that specialize in the weapon of the day, so while Shulk's precognition is notable, his sword mastery ultimately landed him just short of the top 10. We're looking for the best fighters, but also for characters that best represent the weapon, exhibit what we love about the trope, and if possible, do something unique with it. So with the intro already too long, who could have seen that coming? Let's put our minds to the test. These are the top 10 video game psychics.
I am Psycho Mantis.
Yeah, I'm just as surprised as you to say this, but Psycho Mantis, probably the single most famous psychic in the medium, just barely squeaked in at number 10. Heresy, I know. But before I explain why he's lower than expected, let me illustrate why he absolutely had to make the list. Mantis comprises a short but iconic segment in the original Metal Gear Solid, and immediately demonstrates his mental mastery. He's able to levitate and throw objects in the room, has incredible cognitive influence, letting him mind control capable soldiers like Meryl in seconds, and possesses what appears to be illusory powers? I think that explains why he's impossible to damage, at least until you befuddle him by changing your controller ports. Sure, that's a pretty easy way to disrupt his powers, but then again, Snake might never have defeated him without the help from beyond the fourth wall. Several games later, when Ocelot's calling the evil shots, he must have felt nostalgic for his Shadow Moses days because he hires a mercenary contingent with the same animal naming convention. This includes Screaming Mantis, who's a mighty mindjacker in her own right with a creepy marionette theme, but after defeating her, it turns out that she and the entire Beauty and the Beast Corps have been controlled by the ghost of Psycho Mantis this whole time?
That's right. This is no trick. It's true power.
Wow, psychic energy from beyond the grave. Sheesh. Unfortunately, he can't really attack you directly because the PS3 hardware is more complex than the PS1 or GameCube? Or maybe the Ghost of the Sorrow was chasing him away? Things with Mantis are never really explained. That all changed in Metal Gear Solid 5, which bridges the gap between the prequels and the original games. Here, we meet a wee lad named Mantis, and it turns out that he's more powerful than we could have imagined. But also, not? See, that gas mask he wears isn't just to hide his train wreck of a face. It's a blinder, because Psycho Mantis is so empathetically sensitive to the world around him. For instance, just being in the same medical ward as Colonel Volgin's corpse, Volgin's residual murder vibes actually affect Mantis and lull him into Volgin's rage and vengeance, so Mantis in turn physically reanimates Volgin into the Man of Fire and has him stalk Big Boss to no end. A similar thing happens when he meets a young Liquid Snake. Mantis sponges up all of Liquid's evil inclinations, and that right there is why I'm hesitant to put Mantis any higher. He's monstrously strong, enough so that he can use a Metal Gear as a puppet, but he also has no resistance to the wills of those around him. He's a vehicle, a tool for the evilest person in the vicinity. But a heck of a tool he is, like an industrial-grade pile driver with mind control. I was surprised by the number of psychics I found in fighting games. For a genre all about hand-to-hand combat, there's an awful lot of brain blasting going on. You have Mortal Kombat's Kenshi making up for his blindness with telekinetic throws, or the Street Fighter series where Psycho Power is a running plot point contributing to many characters' movesets. The one that stuck out to me, though, didn't do so by being the most formidable, but for being the most irritating to fight. Athena Asamiya from the King of Fighters series. I know, putting Athena over Kenshi or M. Bison might sound insane, but hear me out. First of all, Athena uses her powers more exclusively. Kenshi relies partly on his sword and M. Bison on his big bulging muscles.
Of course!
And while Athena is a master of Wing Chun Kung Fu, it turns out it's a good complement for her extrasensory powers. Wing Chun puts a lot of focus on meditation and attacking with a clear mind, making it easier for Athena to access her aberrant abilities mid-combo. These often take the form of psionic energy, empowering her attacks in a similar way to Bison's psycho charges, but in a pleasing pink hue. She can also fire projectiles, put up reflective barriers, bend space to teleport, and even heal herself. In the hands of a skilled player or a cranked up computer, she's a real headache to deal with. And now, fun fact. Athena as a character has deep roots in the SNK history, first appearing in Psycho Soldier where she defended the world from aliens in 1987. And a year before that, there was an arcade platformer just called Athena. Though, this seems to take place in ancient times, whereas Athena Asamiya is from modern-day Japan. There's a reason for this, though. At the end of Athena, the titular princess ascends to the heavens. She might just be a loose adaptation of her namesake, the Greek goddess of tactics and wisdom. Athena Asamiya is believed to be a spiritual descendant of Princess Athena. Her psychic gifts transmigrated to her from this divine figure. She's basically a reincarnated goddess, in addition to a martial arts master and, weirdly enough, a pop idol. A Renaissance woman. I respect that. Honestly wish she spent more time on tour, though, and less time kicking my ass! I'll be happy to never have to hear the word Psycho Ball ever again. Athena spends most of her energy fighting martial artists with varying amounts of power. But when your main adversary is a full-blown superhero, you'd better be ready to take it up a notch. Infamous, the Static Shock reboot I always wanted, is about electrokinetic Cole McGrath, as he navigates a city after the recent mutation of its populace. At first, Cole's powers are attributed to the activation of the Ray Sphere that ripped Empire City a new one, but in actuality, Cole is what is called a conduit. His powers already existed in his body, they were simply dormant until now. And as it turns out, there's a whole contingent of conduits who have been honing their powers all their lives, not the least of which is the telekinetic Alden Tate. Alden's father Richard ran a radical group called the First Sons, an underground society well aware of conduits, and as a boy, Alden was recognized for his preternatural abilities and primed to one day lead the First Sons to supremacy over the normies. But when Big Bad Kessler took over the First Sons, he cast Alden out before his powers could fully bloom. Now homeless and alone, Alden was forced to survive on the streets, where his powers manifested big time. He started his own gang, the Dustmen, and was already an imposing threat before the Ray Sphere blast, which only made him stronger. Cole had everything set up for him to gain powers, but Alden's been working for his whole life. Though, in actuality, he's just trying to reclaim the silver unbent spoon he was born with before it was so rudely taken from his mouth. Privileged or not, Alden gets results. Athena can throw people around, sure, but Alden's telekinesis is at bus lifting and junkyard mecha levels. His favorite material to work with is the metal and debris of the city, at times using it to form an animatronic shell around him. Sure, it might make him a bigger target, but hell if it doesn't look cool. He can also accelerate particles of steel to the effect of machine gun fire and superheat portions of iron to simulate breathing fire. But perhaps most impressive are his scrap men. In terms of game development, they're just more humanoid creatures that can use the same AI, but when you really think about it, he's shaping the material into people and basically giving them autonomy, able to fight Cole even when Alden isn't around. With telekinesis! That sort of breaks my mind, honestly. Alden basically uses psychic powers to play Dungeon Master, dropping mobs and finally a big boss encounter on Cole. I don't know if it's the most practical use of his skill set, but the fact that he can do it begs consideration. And to think, there's a timeline where Cole didn't unlock his powers right away, and Kessler never kicked Alden out of the First Sons. It makes you wonder what Alden could have become. A big hurdle to writing this list was deciding what powers are psychic in nature. My general rule is, you know it when you see it, but sometimes it's not that simple. For instance, there are two last-minute franchises I had to meditate on. The first is The World Ends With You, where protagonist Neku can use a wide variety of powers by equipping different pins. These moves are called psychs, so they seem to fit the bill, but they can range from elemental attacks like air slashes to just drinking a soda to heal. Sorry, but chugging cherry coke doesn't exactly feel very psychic to me. Joshua is more thematically psychic, casually dropping cars and bikes on enemies, but even with that in mind, his fighting style is pretty passive compared to bus-tossing Alden, and while it's implied that he's a lot more powerful, you don't really see this power in-game. Which is probably a good thing, but makes him a shaky candidate for this list. But on the opposite side of the RPG spectrum, there's Mass Effect with the Asari, think blue elves with hentai hair, who utilize a system called biotics. Biotics are performed by manipulating dark energy to create Mass Effect fields that reproportion gravity in physical space. In short, it's what the writers called psychic powers, but they also wanted to be cool and spacey about it. It appears naturally in certain advanced alien races and can even be utilized by humans with the use of brain implants. So on the one hand, we have a game that calls everything psychic, and on the other hand, we have a game with perfect psychics that refuses to call them such. Given the limited space on this list, however, I went with the space elf that can lift robots like she's hailing a cab. As an Asari, Liara Tassoni is biologically gifted with her blue whooshy psychic powers, and has an extra long lifespan to get acquainted to them. And although she is considered young by Asari standards at just over a century old, Liara is something of a prodigy even among her people, with techniques well suited for gunfights. She can levitate objects to create cover, cause enemies to float off the ground by slapping her signature singularity on suckers, and can even hold them in stasis fields, making them convenient receptacles for bullets. And she can even do this in rapid succession with a simple flick of her wrist or thrust of her palm, no hardware necessary. She's a pretty interesting character to boot. The daughter of a powerful Asari matriarch, basically super old Asari that act as the Council of Elrond, she was still often stigmatized for being pure-blooded. Both of her parents were Asari, a big taboo in their society for health reasons. Regardless, she still excelled in both biotics and her field of study, archaeology, specifically involving artifacts from an ancient alien race. She's like a starry-eyed psychic Indiana Jones. However, she doesn't stay sweet and innocent for long. After the harrowing events that occurred at the beginning of Mass Effect 2, Liara began delving into the shady underground world of information trading, from sorting through information to sifting through artifacts. She also got way more ruthless, growing from demure shy girl to cutthroat badass threatening to flay someone alive. With her mind. Talk about a 180. And that's not even getting into Mass Effect 3, where, without spoilers, she gets a massive upgrade in responsibilities and leads the charge for one of the galaxy's greatest think tanks to combat the unfolding apocalyptic events. You know that recurring trope in Star Trek likes, where the captain has a psychic consultant on deck to stoically report the vague emotions of the enemy? Liara is that. If she then threw Kirk through a window for being incompetent and then led the mission herself. Now that's what I call mind over matter. Or mind manipulating matter in her case.
It's no use!
I can already feel the migraines starting. Well, it doesn't get much more straightforward than the Gotta Go Fast series, Sonic. Psychics weren't really touched upon much in the franchise for a while, just some beyond the grave messages from Tikal, and it's mentioned a few times that Amy does tarot readings. But then the concept was devoted to Silver the Hedgehog in everyone's favorite game, Sonic 06. I guess if you're going to make a third playable hedgehog in your game, a fourth really, considering Amy, you better have a gimmick in mind, and Silver's is telekinesis. And that he's from an apocalyptic future. Apparently when you're a time traveler, psychic abilities are pretty low on the please explain list. Now I could justify the entry right here by saying that Silver is nigh unbeatable in Sonic 06, unless you figure out how to cheese the fight. He'll just grab you out of thin air, launch you skyward, and grab you again before you even hit the ground. He'll also stun-lock you forever if you're not careful, making it impossible for you to recollect your lost rings for a guaranteed death, or worse, force you to recollect your rings so that his attack goes on forever. Dear God! Silver really commits to using this power for everything too. He doesn't even run, he just pushes himself through the air, making him the slowest hedgehog, sadly. But this also does let him pick up environmental objects, form platforms in context-sensitive situations, and even stop bullets a la the Matrix. If I'm being honest, Silver is kind of awesome. If only he were in a game that wasn't so... You know what, I'll complete that thought when Sega completes this game. But then Silver comes back as a boss in Sonic Generations, and boy howdy is it nice to see him in a great... good... competent project. He can now comfortably float through Crisis City at Mach speeds, keeping himself ahead of the blue blur at all times, and can blast Sonic with garbage in rapid succession, instead of just blasting us with garbage mechanics. Oh, Alden can lift a bus? Please, Silver's playing Katamari with Route 66. Now, if we could just play as him in another mainline title. I know most of the ancillary cast have been blacklisted from the series while Sega retools how to make Sonic work.
What the fuck is a Sonic?!
But whenever he's around, I kind of love him. Now that the Darkest Timeline is prevented, Silver's treated like this awkward exchange student. In Sonic Team Racing, he's failing to learn the art of trading quips.
I'm so gonna own you, Silver.
Okay.
No, you're supposed to say in your dreams, Sonic.
In your dreams, Sonic.
Too late. The moment's passed.
And in the comics, he's geeking out over plants. What a freaking dork. For real, let's give this guy another shot. He's a good boy, and more to the point, an Omega-level psychic that can glide around at the speed of sound. Justice for Silver, guys. It is not no use.
Perfect!
I'm willing to bet a lot of you guessed this one when you saw the content warning. It's time for First Encounter Assault Recon, aka Fear, aka Alma Wade. There are a ton of horror game creatures that pick at the sanity of the player, but Alma strikes a perfect balance for this list, being explained well enough that I know for a fact that she's psychic, but still incomprehensible enough that she's eldritch and foreboding. I mean, for starters, in many ways she's already dead. Let me back up a bit. There's no real origin to her powers. Alma was born with this miraculous potential, so Dad of the Year Harlan Wade decided to offer her up for weapons experimentation. You know at the beginning of Stranger Things when they run tests on Eleven? It's like that, only so much worse. The Armachan Technology Corporation starts by picking and prodding her to find the limits of her powers, and when Alma becomes reasonably upset and voices her frustrations by killing people with flesh-rending brainwaves, they lock her in a metal sphere and induce a permanent coma so that they can still experiment on her. All when she's 8! There are a few more steps to this that I don't really want to talk about, too grimdark for me. But in time, the scientists remember that as a psychic, Alma doesn't have to be awake to wreak havoc on everyone in the vicinity. So they pull the plug on the experiments, and Alma. This successfully kills her, but leaves us with an irate psychic ghost whose mere existence forces a neighborhood evacuation. And that's not all. Armacham's experiments allowed them to develop a clone army, because clone armies are always a great idea. Hi, Star Wars! And also give psychic powers to one Paxton Fettel, who is appointed to remotely control these perfectly in-sync replica soldiers. But the ghost of Christmas Alma simply takes control of Paxton, which means she controls the soldiers, so now Baby Grudge has a synchronized murder squad at her beck and call. Great! We've been focusing on telekinetics thus far on this list, but lest we forget how OP a murderous telepath can be. At first, it's just the occasional scare, as Alma's childlike avatar flits around your peripheral vision, but in time, she'll be strutting her stuff in her adult, emaciated body and spawning nightmares that endlessly chase you down, all of this in the first game. In Fear 2, newly reconstituted Alma is catching up on her missed adulthood, and she kinda has a crush on you. That is the nicest way I can say just how screwed up this game is. No more teasing. Alma is constantly on your tail now, with hallucinatory barrages and telekinetic smackdowns for anyone who gets in her way. You can try to hold her back with bullets, but she's done the whole death thing already and she doesn't really care for it. I wouldn't call Alma the most powerful character on this list, but seeing as she's basically the only psychic, and the game's player characters are just soldiers with slight cranial improvements, it's one of the biggest power gaps between a hero and their main adversary. And while she's somewhat vulnerable to the evil personalities of those around her, much like Psycho Mantis, she is definitely acting of her own free will in these games. I like that by switching between generic protagonists throughout the trilogy, Alma remains the main character of the story, getting revenge for the unspeakable things done to her, and trying to move on in her own emotionally stunted way. I almost didn't list her because for Weapons Month, I like to focus on how characters fight. But then I realized it just didn't feel like a fight to me because most of the time she's effortlessly winning. Yeah, you go, girl. Preferably away from me. Why is it that whenever a government finds an absurdly high-level psychic, their first instinct is to run procedures and piss them off? Much like Alma, Sarah Kerrigan from StarCraft was a psychic wunderkind, and after accidentally frying her mother's brain and hospitalizing her father at the age of 8, she was taken away by the Terran Confederacy to become a human weapon. Unlike Alma, who to our knowledge is the first psychic in the Fear series, Kerrigan was born into a universe 400 years into the future, one where psionic humans are fairly common, and she still managed to be the most powerful ever recorded. Even at a young age, her aptitude tested so high that they had to create a new standard of measurement for it. And to the Confederacy's credit, a phrase that I thought I'd never say, they did manage to keep Kerrigan in line. All it took was a neuroinhibitor that made it impossible for Kerrigan to disobey a direct order. And so, Kerrigan began her career as a psychic operative, or ghost, designated as Ghost number 24601. Wait, is that a Les Miserables reference? Thought you could sneak that one by me, Blizzard, I'm onto you. So even with a chip dampening her, Kerrigan manages to be the most capable ghost in StarCraft, teaming up with Jim Raynor as the two find themselves embroiled in a three-way interstellar war between the Terran, the hyper-advanced Protoss, and the Zerg, a new alien threat that devours civilizations with its hive mind tactics. Well, it turns out Kerrigan uniquely was proficient enough to psychically overtake Zerglings, which the Confederacy planned to use against its foreign and domestic enemies, but fate worked out differently, and Kerrigan was killed holding off a Zerg swarm as Jim Raynor flew to safety. Or so it seemed. It seems Kerrigan's prowess was detected by the Zerg as well, and rather than devour her, the Overmind had Kerrigan's body infested. Normally this would zombify a person, but Kerrigan passed all of her will saves and managed to retain her intelligence, some of her personality, and most importantly, that magnificent psionic ability. And with the neural inhibitor removed, Kerrigan is stronger than ever. She can now command thousands of Zerg at a time, mind control people on other planets, and, after absorbing some essence from the ancient Xel'Naga race, can harness celestial radiation into Death Star lasers. she is frequently referred to as the most powerful being in the universe, and it's hard to argue against it. So why only number 4? Honestly, I might be lowballing her a little bit, but if you remember how I am with Weapons Month, I don't like to give high ranks to characters that use more than one weapon. And while psychic powers are easily Kerrigan's greatest feature, I find it's oddly downplayed in many of her appearances. Oftentimes it's just used as a means of commanding Zerg, creatures that are already loyal to her, so she uses her immense psychic power like a glorified PA system. She's also playable in Heroes of the Storm, but she's a melee assassin for some reason, and her kit revolves more around blades. Now granted, she is called the Queen of Blades, and she's gotta utilize those badass wing appendages at least a little bit. It just gets further and further away from Psychic in my opinion, as cool as it is to call her an Ultralisk. Don't get me wrong, she's probably the second best fighter on this list, a universal threat. But these last 3 are a little more, let's say, exemplary of the video game's Psychic to me. Though now that I've dabbled in StarCraft a little bit, it does feel good to finally talk about her. It would be a war crime not to. Psychics have always been a thing in Pokemon. It's one of the original 15 types, and due to some poor planning and programming in Generation 1, was a popular pick for your predetermined pack of 6. So you know we need a Pokemon rep somewhere. In past countdowns, we've gone back and forth with our approach in this series, giving spots to either a particularly strong Pokemon, or famous trainers who utilize that type for a team. For instance, Koga was our number 1 poison wielder in Weapons Month 3, which made sense because at the time there didn't seem to be a clear optimum poison Pokemon better than the rest, whereas Koga, a ninja, weaponizes poison throughout his entire strategy as a gym leader and Elite 4 member. However, we don't have that same problem with the Psychic type, because as accomplished as Sabrina and Lucian might be, Mewtwo has always held a special place in the Pokemon mythos. The plot of Generation 1 is fairly simple, but they laid a lot of backstory on Mewtwo, even building him up using the notes in the Burned Mansion. We learn of the seemingly extinct Mew, an embryo-like mythical thought to hold the DNA of all other Pokemon. In terms of Pokemon lore, Mew would have been the first to populate the Earth after Arceus and other similar godlike entities, becoming the genetic ancestor for all 800-some species to follow. Unable to find a living specimen, scientist Mr. Fuji, with help from Blaine and even Team Rocket, depending on the continuity you're following, attempted to recombine and clone the primordial Mon, their efforts finally bearing fruit. On February 6th, Mewtwo was born. Yep, Mewtwo's an Aquarius. With the trauma of being made in a lab! Mewtwo not only became incredibly powerful, but incredibly spiteful. And after its escape, spent most of its time hiding out in remote caves, or in the case of Pokemon the first movie, organizing an ironic battle tournament to strike back against humanity. I wouldn't call Mewtwo a villain or anything, but whenever spin-offs needed a final boss, that's usually where they went. And can you really blame them? Mewtwo is an absolute unit. Forgive me for being nostalgic, but in that movie, he's just untouchable. I don't think he takes a hit throughout the whole movie, and only Mew forces him to exert any actual effort. Seriously, I have no idea what Ash was thinking. In Generation 1, Mewtwo was just the best Pokemon, with the best type and the best stats. Since Special was still one stat, and all of the counters to the Psychic type either didn't exist yet, had no good attacks, or were misprogrammed to fail. And while the game is a lot more balanced now, Mewtwo still holds his own in the competitive Uber tier with that devastating Psystrike attack. You also get 2 options for Mega Evolutions, Mega Mewtwo Y specializing in psychic attacks, and X specializing in physical. And if that sounds like it makes less sense for a psychic type, keep in mind that the physical special split means you can totally still Psychic Punch. Mewtwo X is basically going the M. Bison route of Psycho Power. Mewtwo also made his mark in the Smash Bros. Series. He was a little awkward at first in Melee, but Wii U and Ultimate really perfected his fighting style. I love how Mewtwo never actually picks up any items, everything just gravitates around him. I'm not sure if Mewtwo is as powerful as Kerrigan, but the Pokédex does state that Mega Mewtwo Y can shatter a skyscraper just by thinking about it. Not that the Pokédex is always realistic, so let's talk about base stats here. Combining all of Mewtwo's stats, it held the highest base stat total for 4 generations at 680, tying only with the top legendaries of each game. Eventually, the higher forms of Kyurem and Arceus, the literal Pokemon god, beat it out. But then, Mewtwo's Mega Forms reclaimed the title at a staggering 780, and to this day, Mega Mewtwo X and Y share the top spot with Mega Rayquaza, and you know how broken that one is. So yeah, maybe Mewtwo doesn't annihilate armies, but it is more competitively viable than its universe's god, and that has to count for something. My only gripe is that, like Kerrigan, Mewtwo has many non-psychic attacks. It has a very diverse move pool, and one of its most famous moves, Shadow Ball, is actually a ghost type. But considering Shadow Ball didn't exist yet when we first saw Mewtwo do that in the movie, I still tend to think that it utilizes some form of psionic energy. While Mewtwo has Ice Beam and the like for coverage options, Mewtwo remains first and foremost a psychic type. The psychic type. Before number 1, we need to take a step back and talk about a character who, true, isn't as astonishing as many on this list, but is in my opinion most emblematic of what a psychic is capable of, from a game all about psychics.
What they don't expect is Raz, the Psychonaut.
And then you'll make their heads explode?
No.
Rasputin Aquato is a preteen circus acrobat who discovered a knack for the cerebral arts, and against his father's wishes ran away to Whispering Rock, a secret government-run summer camp that trains similarly talented children to become mind-reading masters of espionage. The fact that he got there without an invitation undetected should be a pretty good entrance exam. Raz is still in training, and as such, isn't the most powerful psychic even in the game he's from. Full-fledged agents such as Coach Oleander, Sasha 9, and Milla Vodello are demonstrated to be higher skilled. They can even use their powers to fly, a feat Raz has yet to replicate. But Raz shows the potential to one day eclipse all of them in might. He manages to hide his thoughts from those very 3 agents for one thing, and manages to uncover a conspiracy to take down the Psychonauts from within and instigate the next major war with tanks powered by children's removed brains. Think tanks, if you will. Aforementioned agents 9 and Vodello fall right into this trap, but Raz is able to outmaneuver the saboteur Oleander and even go toe-to-toe with him in various psychic competitions. It gives Psychonauts a very 90s Nickelodeon kids rule mentality. Sure, the adults are wiser, but the kids have a fresh perspective that lets them see past the lies some take for granted. Not that any of the other kids are even remotely useful compared to Raz. He masters the fundamentals in under a week, his progress measured by merit badges and corresponding powers. Before his first formal lesson, he can already telekinetically double jump and punch enemies with giant force fists. With a little instruction, he can use pyrokinesis to blow things up, Psyblast for ranged combat, force fields to deflect projectiles, levitation to move fast and jump high, and even clairvoyance to find secrets and see things the way others see them. One of my favorites in terms of creativity is the confusion grenade. Boiled down, it's just a way to stupefy your target, but the animation has Raz pulling the pin out of a question mark and lobbing it like an explosive. I love it. Far and away, Raz's most impressive feat is where the knot in Psychonaut comes in. He uses these doors to enter people's minds, interpreted as enormous platforming worlds. He can't exactly dominate people in this way like Kerrigan or Mantis, but he can use this to search for information, quickly travel through the collective unconscious to get to other minds, and dramatically affect people from within. He manages to essentially cure the mental illnesses of several prison inmates by confronting their inner demons. He's like a psychology knot, and Raz does this probably better than anyone. During the game's finale, Raz's brain gets pulled out of his skull, long story, and even without a body, Raz is able to telekinetically flick his brain around to the tank with Oleander's brain, creating a tangled mind world of shared neuroses that all the professionals agree should have resulted in complete ego death. But instead, Raz manages to traverse the ludicrous mashup, befriend Oleander's inner child, remove his penchant for evil, and restore both of them to factory settings. Damn right you'd better promote Raz to a full-fledged agent after that! And, well, we've been waiting for a true sequel ever since. It's been 15 long years for crap's sake. I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface of what Raz can do. No game has gotten more out of the concept of psychic powers, and Raz remains the first thing I think of when you say video game psychic. I wouldn't lie about this, and I probably wouldn't be able to lie to Raz about it either. He's got the key to the brain vault. I did not see this one coming when I first started writing. The number 1 spot started as a deadlock of several characters from one series, and by the time I decided which one of them should be included, it was clear to me that this next entry was going to be our champion. So, let's talk about the Mother series. Mother, Earthbound, whatever you want to call it, this bizarre trilogy did everything it could to set itself apart from other fantasy adventures, giving the JRPG a more sci-fi tinge, but not like Final Fantasy VI or Xenogears sci-fi, more like suburban paranoia sci-fi, Twilight Zone sci-fi if you will. As such, magic is swapped out for psionics, and is usable by most major characters in the series. Ness was my first thought, partially because of his performance in Smash Bros., chasing down thugs with PK Thunder, spamming the hell out of PK Fire, and oh god, that back throw! Lucas deserves merit too, just as much of a threat, and if you consider the power creep from Mother 2 to 3, probably better equipped than Ness. But when you think about it, Ness and Lucas aren't even the best psychics from their respective games. I mean, what kind of psychic needs a baseball bat? Paula has the most PSI damage in Earthbound, and Kumatora is the specialist in Mother 3. Also, PK Starstorm, Ness and Lucas' final smashes, don't even belong to them. Ness is just borrowing that move from Pooh, and Lucas from Kumatora. It looks like Kumatora has the best resume here, but it was Paula's prayer that helped the team survive Gygus. Oh. Gygus! None of these pitiful humans would even have powers without Gygus. A member of an alien race that developed psychokinesis, Gygus was raised by two humans, Maria and George, who had been abducted but allowed to live on the alien world. They raised Gygus as their own, but George was secretly studying the science of PK, and one day suddenly escaped with it to Earth. This created a slight chance for any human child to be born with PK, and Gygus was tasked by his planet to reclaim what his foster parents stole. The heroes of Eaglin perform PK like an art form, but to Gygus it's as natural as breathing. His mere presence on Earth creates most of the random encounters in the game, where people, animals, and even inanimate objects are agitated enough to attack children on the street. So, if Gygus is so strong, why was he defeated twice? Because he kind of wasn't. Ninten's crew in Mother 1 had to use the 8 melodies, which, when combined, form Maria's lullaby. Gygus isn't being overpowered, he just gets so emotional about his family's betrayal that he leaves. But that inner turmoil only makes him stronger in Mother 2. Gygus is 10 years away from total world domination. Let's appreciate how many bones the plot of this game throws Ness to even the odds. An emissary from the future has to spur Ness and company to set out on their journey. Then Ness has to go further back in time to even stand a chance against a less developed Gygus. And even then, they're completely outmatched. Approaching Gygus is like walking into a dimension of madness, your mind dissolving. You cannot comprehend the attacks coming your way. He is so titanically potent, we cannot hope to understand it. Paula has to use a prayer, calling upon the goodwill of the world and even the player themselves just to pacify Gygus. And even with him gone, his influence lives on in the evil imprint he's made on followers like Porky Minch. So, the #1 spot absolutely goes to Gygus, a god of thought that, as a baby, nearly soloed reality. Well, that's our list. Let's take a little time to clear our heads before we go on to the next. I can see the future of Weapons Month, and it's looking pretty great. I'm the Green Scorpion, and I'll see you all next time. Be on your guard.